Good afternoon and welcome to the presentation today, which is on ways to document evidence for ISO 9001-2015. It's always great to represent a global certification body. If you're not with us, it's worth having a look at this particular map. We are rated in the top 3 in the UK for 9001, 14,000, 45 and 27,000 as well. And as you can see, our customers are quite happy with us and all is well. So moving into the webinar itself, what we're hoping to do this afternoon is actually look how to create a lean system without lots of unnecessary paperwork. I don't think businesses like it, and neither do auditors. We're going to look at what the standard actually requires for documented information as well, just so that you're clear what you actually need and what you don't need. We're going to look at the workforce hopefully being more effective as a result of that, and still being able to satisfy what your auditor wants to see. And then we'll look briefly at where to start when considering reducing and updating your system and those important plans that go with that. So the most relevant quote I can think of really is whether it's the best of times or worst of times. It's the only time that we've actually got. And that's quite pertinent, I think, in this day and age, because the focus is on getting product and service out and maintaining revenue, I suppose, rather than having lots of time to be effectively looking at lots of documents and satisfying audit requirements. So it's about bringing value back into your system. So if you've got your manual in front of you, I'm guessing that you have got a manual, it might be worth getting your bits and bobs about and just asking yourself, what does your quality management system currently look like? So we do the audits every day, back to back, and I most generally do the quality management system standard. So I can tell you that certainly from what I see daily, I can't think of many places that don't have a quality manual, which is really strange because it's not required, and it's very difficult to actually find what value it brings to the business. Some love them and feel that it does work for them, but most of the time what we see is it'll come off a shelf and we blow the dust off it, and that's probably the only time that most people do utilise it. We'll definitely have a policy because that's a requirement, and it'll either be sat within a manual or it'll be on a notice board or in a reception area. This is generally speaking. And other than your visitor who's looking at your manual or in your reception area, the question is who actually reads it? Also, what we see is lots of folders of written procedures and flowcharts on walls, and the question which I often ask myself is, are these actually effective? Do they work? What purpose do they actually bring? Is it because people think it's an ISO requirement? We've got to have management review minutes, so of course we'll have those documented somewhere, but where are they actually stored? Are they going to be put in a folder somewhere in somebody's office? Do they come out just before the review and then are they folded away again and stored? We need to record non-conformances, so it's likely that we'll have a non-conformance register. How often do we manage it? What do we actually do with it? Where's it stored? Who knows where it is? And then of course we've got internal audits, so of course we know that they're going to have to be a documented piece of information. But the question I would always ask a business, are they utilised, or is it one of these ISO requirements again that just becomes a bit of a burden? So the purpose of all of this is to help you imagine what your system actually could be, and that's ostensibly a functional tool in one place that actually adds value. So a lot of us are now working from home, and I think a question that we're probably asking daily is, so if we're at home, how is everybody in the business accessing the quality management system? How do we know they're being used, and how do we know if it's adding value or not? We've got software that we're using daily, so Teams, Google Hangouts, Zoom, WhatsApp, email, And I suppose the question to ask as a business is, have you considered using this as a main mode of communication? And maybe, you know, house best placed for your quality management system? It doesn't seem to make much sense to say, well, yeah, we use Hangouts all day, or we use WhatsApp every day to communicate, because we can't just walk across the corridor anymore, or go to a canteen, or meet up for a coffee for lunch and discuss things as we naturally would. It's all done on these little computers and mobile phones. So why would you have your quality management system housed elsewhere? Can we imagine how much time would be saved? A, not having to search through loads of files, and B, not having to take somebody from away from what they're doing to spend a day, a couple of days creating all of this paperwork as well. We're not really using it, is what I see, generally anyway. And of course, if it's all in one place, so for example on Teams, which has the capability as well as the other software on there to upload files, to have meetings, video calls, sharing screens, generally that one person in the group has control, and therefore it's a good way of controlling documented information. So a great frustration for me anyway is that a lot of the time we're not seeing that most e-manual can be done effectively, visually, and communicated simply by reducing duplication and, frankly, waffle. So daily, what we see, as I said earlier, is that we will ask, you know, do you have a quality manual? It seems daft not to ask that question anymore, because more people have it than don't. In fact, I think there's probably maybe two or three companies I can think of out of all of the companies I assess that maybe don't have a quality manual at all. And of course it gets trotted out. And what I'm seeing more and more of is this approach of recording the information. It's meant to be a usable document, of course. It's meant to add value and provide what the context of the business is. And it was meant to sort of give a tangible piece of instruction for people to look at and say, oh, right, okay, I can read this and I'll know what to do. And in most cases, they're not actually like that. Okay, so there's an almost direct copy and paste of the standard. And I've just taken this directly from section 4 of the 9001 standard. And literally all I've done is, instead of saying the organisation shall have, I've replaced it with we. We have established, implemented, maintained and continually improved quality management system. Great. And we have determined the processes, and then I've removed the organisation from points A to G, and I've just said that, put it in a past tense, that we've determined the inputs, we've determined the sequence, and we've determined and applied the criteria and methods determined. So effectively, I have on this slide what most people have within their quality manual. We may say from that it tells you absolutely nothing whatsoever. It doesn't tell the users of the system anything. It doesn't tell your auditor anything. It's taken somebody a lot of time to put these things together, and they look very professional and very pretty. And I often, when trying to get information from people, and you know, we get a very long, complex answer that is lengthy and doesn't tell us anything. It's corporate fluff. The idea of the management tool is to make it a usable process for everybody. And by keeping it simple and making it interactive, you will probably find that instead of spending a lot of time and resource putting a manual together, you will actually get an interaction if we look at the other methods. So a manual will generally have for context maybe half an A4 page to 2 pages in some instances. let's look at some other methods. So you've got posters, for example. They're really easily created, they're visual, they're informative, people look at them. And if we're looking to maybe digitalise the entire system, then it's not going to take up a lot of storage. We've got some consultants who've been creating dashboard systems. So it's really easy for the users, particularly people who work in front of a desktop or a laptop. And you can go to anybody in the company and you can say, do you know where your quality policy is? And they say yes, and they click on an icon which says policy. It's sort of like a mini server. They can find all the procedures, they can find any meeting minutes, they can find anything they want to do with the actual organisation themselves. Now, obviously, there's a cost implication to put something like that in, but it is working, and it's certainly more advanced and updated and user-friendly than our paper-friended quality manual. If you think about context, how much money have you put investing into a website? So that's your new shop front window, isn't it? So if I click on your website, I would expect you to tell me what you do, who I can contact to find out more about your service or your product, or to purchase. What products and services do you sell? Whereabouts are you based? That's basically your context, isn't it? It's what's probably in your manual, who you are and what you do. So you might argue that in fact you've covered that element of the standard through your website, because in your interested parties, your customers are interested parties, and arguably potential customers are interested parties. So immediately whoever clicks on your website, in some respects, you've met that part of the standard. So the mechanism that you use to communicate, to go back to what we were saying just a few moments ago, throughout your business at the moment, does it not make sense to make this the platform for your quality management system? So I've done a little bit of work for you, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through each section of the standard and what documentation it asks for. So I think when I counted it, it was 34 or 39 times, actually, excluding the introduction and so on and so forth. I'm actually looking at what the standard wants from you. It's actually very little. There's lots of words and so on and so forth, and I'm going to break it down as simply as I can for you. And then after this little section, these 4 bits of the standard, I have actually created a document to show you how simple it is to satisfy the majority of this on one sheet of paper. So the context of the organisation, we've just spoken about it quite a lot. What do we do? Do we need to document it? No, we don't. All the standard wants you to document from this part of the standard is your scope, and you'll find that on the certificate that we've provided for you. It will say scope, and then in bold letters it will say, we would hope that you would know anyway, but you need to document it yourselves so that you can sort of evidence to us that we know that you know what we certified for. And then the next thing it needs you to have documented is to maintain, support operational processes and provide confidence that processes work. So I think people sometimes get a little bit confused at this point and think, right, okay, so what that's asking me to do is have a procedures and work instructions folders, and I can show the auditor when they come out and they say, well, how are you confident that things, because I've got all these work instructions written here. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but we'll work through the standard and you'll hopefully get to see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. Leadership, it's quite a lengthy part of the standard, isn't it? It's asking you to do lots of things, and it's asking you to evidence lots of things. But actually, the only thing you need documented is a policy, and that policy should be displayed and communicated, and it must be written. So out of all that chunk of writing, you need to produce one document. Planning. So again, we're looking at sort of implementing what's come out of the leadership section. All you need to write down, all you need to be able to show is your objectives, that they are documented. Obviously, I'm simplifying this a lot in terms of this is the only thing you need to be able to show your auditor. But what the caveat is, you also need to, if you're not going to document anything else, retain the information of everything that's going on in your business and make sure that your staff are aware as well. And we'll go through that, we'll cover it all, so don't worry, but please make sure that your objectives are clearly written for everybody to see, not just your auditor. Your support section is looking at, I suppose, the people element of the standard. So have you got the right infrastructure? We're looking at environment that people work in. We're looking at the competence of people. We're also looking as well to make sure that we've got the right resources. And part of the resources element is, have we got the right equipment? Is the equipment going to function correctly? And this part of the standard will ask you to have some documentation. So monitoring and measuring of resources and fitness for purpose. So basically, excuse me, what it's asking you to do is produce some form of evidence which is documented. So it might be a policy. If you haven't got equipment which needs, for example, a statutory inspection, such as a Lola, or you haven't got equipment which would need calibrating, such as micrometers or verniers or X-ray machines, for want of a less dramatic example, then you would still have something to measure, wouldn't you? You would still sort of say, right, okay, today we need to produce 300 tins of beans. Have we got the right amount of staff? Have we got the right amount of machinery? Is everything fit for purpose, or do we need to start planning actually and buying new machinery or recruiting more staff? That's what it means. So it can be a policy that you will measure these resources however you would like to do it, but that needs documenting. Obviously, if you're calibrating something, if you're getting a statutory inspection, then of course you need to be able to show in terms of regulation, if you've got a forklift truck or you've got overhead cranes, and they're utilised within your system, you need to be able to show your auditor your Lola cert, and you need to be able to show how you're controlling equipment which requires either internal or external verification that it's correct for measuring. Evidence of competence is always an area of contention, really. Who decides who's competent? Well, the company does. Obviously, if there's a requirement, a mandated requirement, so for example first aid, that would really need to be an external body, or an accredited body that provides that. So you can say they're competent in first aid and you can show the auditor the certificate for that. If they need a CSCS card, then of course that's given a level of competence. You can show your auditor that. And how you control the competence, there's various ways that you can do it. So you might want to have a training matrix in place. You might just want a bog standard Outlook calendar, which alerts you a couple of months before somebody's certificates or required cards run out, so that you know, oh, I need to book that in. All these methods are ways of control, but it doesn't necessarily require lots of paperwork. And I think in the old days we all had a matrix, and it went from an Excel spreadsheet or an individual folder in Word to, we got really excited and clever, and we had traffic light systems and all of these newfangled things. But actually it's quite a simple way of showing your auditor, yeah, it's in my calendar, and it doesn't take up any further room or storage, and it's something that you're probably going to use all the time. Now, the great thing about the support section is it houses and gives you the details itself on documented information section. So it's up to the company to determine documented information as being necessary for the effectiveness of the quality management system. So all of these boxes I'm showing you, these are what you must have. You must have these in place, but then it's up to the company whether you want other items in place. So it's not for an external auditor to tell you, you should have this form, or you should have this piece of paperwork, or you should create this document. It's down to the company, excluding what is in these blue boxes, to say, well, we don't need that because we've assessed it, or we don't need this because it's not going to assist the system. And I think what we've all found over the years of doing this is that just tons and tons of paperwork, it doesn't do anything but bog people down a little bit and hinder a process rather than make it nice and sleek. And that's the joy of coming into the technological age. We need to, and this is often overlooked, version control when updating and creating. So you need to show how you're controlling your documented information, even if it's all in one place. And we've stuck it in Zoom as the place to go, and I know if I'm on Zoom, because that's how we communicate, I'm going to click on file and I can look at what I want. I can see it's version 5 and I can see it was created 5th of November 2020. I know it's going to be the most up to date. There's always going to be that one person, and I am guilty of it myself, of you save something to a desktop and that's your go-to, and then you forget to remove it. And so it's just best to work off what the company is providing. And I think that's possibly an area where, when we do look at version control, because we have to, that's generally what's happened. Someone has saved it to the desktop and we've not controlled it. But by putting everything in the one place and asking people to use that daily, then you have less chance of that happening. So I've tried to come up with an example to show you of getting rid of the wretched quality manual, because they do take up a lot of time and space, and I keep saying that, but I truly believe that there's more effective ways of dealing with it. Now, the issue that I've had is because everything we see is confidential and we are an impartial external body that come in, I didn't want to put together an example of anything that I would see on a daily basis, like an industry or a company that I would go into. So it's been quite difficult to come up with a scope or a business example that NQA would probably never ever audit. So I apologise that the concept of the company is absolutely ridiculous, but the idea of just showing you how the replacement for your manual could look is there. So this is the example company. It doesn't exist in terms of a commercial use, obviously, but it probably is actually daily life, because I just I live in a zoo, loads of cats, loads of dogs, and this is probably why I've come up with it, because I know nobody would ever bother certifying. So dead simple. This is one sheet of A4. I did it on Word. It took me 10 minutes. So Jude's fantastic company, you know who I am. I've documented my scope straight away underneath, and that's the scope that would appear on the certificate that would never be given. I've met section 4 that we looked about in terms of, we need to ensure our processes are supported and that we've got confidence by producing a line and a half. We ensure our processes meet customer need by receiving feedback, referring to work procedures for standardisation, and internally auditing to ensure processes remain relevant and effective. Excuse me. So those 3 lines, including your scope, I've just knocked an entire part of the section together. That's absolutely fine. That's all that's required for section 4. I have included interested parties, which isn't required as documented information, but it does appear in section 4, because what I'm going to do in my make-believe company is, when I get employees, I'm going to use this as part of their induction, because this is going to tell them a little bit about what we do, what the purpose is, what we want to achieve as a company, and their role in it. So, of course, part of that is they need to know that they are an interested party as an employee, that the people that we consider within our quality management system are our suppliers, our cats, our dogs, insurances, banks, certification bodies, legislators, regulators, animal welfare charities, and our neighbours, because, as you can imagine, with 2 bulldogs, it's not a quiet house. We've then jumped over into the next section, which is leadership. So all I need to document is my quality policy. And I've done that. I've tied it into my objectives as well. So don't forget, within the standard, it asks that the policy is the framework for your objectives. The two should be mechanisms that talk to each other. So I've said we're committed to ensuring all treats supplied to the cats and dogs are suitable for health and enjoyment. So we've just backed up there that this is the purpose of the business. We'll monitor satisfaction of this based on weight and demand from the animals. I've made this an objective as well, so I can verify both there. So I've made it a measurable target of 96% customer satisfaction per annum, and we'll measure that monthly. And then I've tied that in with little red and tiny over here. Obviously, you can only interpret meows and barks, really, can't you? But the looks on the faces basically says we want more treats, so we know they're not entirely satisfied. I've said that we strive for continued improvement by auditing thoroughly suppliers to ensure quality is maintained and controlling our processes. So again, I've put this into a measurable objective to audit suppliers, ensuring 70% of treats supplied are verified as natural ingredients. So again, it's a ridiculous concept for a company idea, but it is this easy to provide you documented information in one place. And how much space does it take up? It's nothing. Looking at support, so I've determined that the equipment required to be calibrated is going to be food weighing scales, and I've determined that they need to be calibrated before each use also. So I've ticked off monitoring and measuring, and then I've also determined the competencies for who I want to work for me. So they should have a level 2 in vet nursing, and they should have an animal first aid, and they should have some form of qualification in commercial hygiene. I can verify that because these are something which would produce an external certificate, and I can ask them, and then any auditor who wants to come into my fantastic company can also have a look at those as well. So that's a really, really basic example. It's not the most colourful and certainly not the most exciting example, but hopefully it should give you a flavour of actually how much clutter in your system you've possibly got knocking about, when actually something like that it does meet the standard. So the next part is operations, and this I think sometimes causes carnage because it's a lot of writing, which makes it look like there's a lot of requirement for actually what is quite a basic process, excluding design and development. And I'm going to address a couple of the issues which come up with design and development as well, but not linger on it too long because very few people have it in the scope, because it is such an area of heavy documentation, as you'd expect for design. Anyway, without further ado, operation plan and control. You need to have something in writing, documented somewhere that you've got confident the process has been carried out as planned, and demonstrate the conformity of the products and services to requirements. So if we look at it on a basic level, you could say that it forms part of your contract review paperwork. So if you're putting together a form, an e-commerce form, or anything which requires filling out, or a procedure, a process, it's basically giving you confidence that you have something in place to support a sale. and support development of a manufacturing process. And let's not forget that this standard covers so many industries and so many countries that sometimes the wording makes it look a bigger project than it actually is. So we basically just have to know what is it we're going to produce and how we're going to try and prevent non-conformity, and if we can't, how do we demonstrate that it has conformed? We've got requirements for products and services, so reviewing customer requirements and ensure any new requirements for products and services. So what's likely is that you will have some software of some variety. Gone are the days, unfortunately, because I love them, where you could ask somebody, can I see your order book? And the order book would have been generated probably from phone calls, and then, you know, eventually emails have come in. So if you get an email query or inquiry, you've got evidence. You've got evidence that you know what your customer requires automatically. Ensuring any new requirements or products and services. If you send out an order acknowledgement form, then you ostensibly check with your customer, this is what you want, we've acknowledged it, and they then have the opportunity to come back and say, no, that I wanted something different, or we've changed our mind. So documented information for that, dead easy, done. Design and development is a contentious area. So I think if you are in the design industry and you are producing a product or a service which has something quite tangible about it, then this will be a practice that you are used to anyway. So you will know that you need to document as part of your planning of your project. It's like a project management thing, really, isn't it? Rather design. You know you're going to have to note down your resources, whether it's going to be verified or validated. You're going to have to establish customer involvement, and you'll want to keep notes of this because you're likely going to have a team doing this, not just one person. It's just about basic communication, really, isn't it? What level of control, your design reviews and your responsibilities, all going to have to be in some respect documented, isn't it? Your design inputs, yes, the standard gives you specific inputs. It's almost like a shopping list. They need documenting. So do the controls, the shopping list provided for you in the standard, and your outputs. And of course, any changes, I think we would naturally want to document them in case somebody else has to pick that part up. So again, it's quite simple. Documents on how you control external processes, resource, and external processes and resource. So basically, what have you bought? Who have you bought it from? Let's go with an example of all my company buys is stationery. I'd have no cause to be buying anything else other than stationery. It's quite simple. So what I might do is I might have a shopping app, and I might just click it and get whatever I need, a pack of pens or what have you. If that's all we're buying and it's, say, under 10 quid, what we're doing, then as long as I can provide the receipts, the shopping app will create the order for me, so I can go back anytime and produce that. Obviously, if I'm now going to be purchasing a 50 grand piece of equipment, you would expect that there is a bit more of a robust process in place, because that's a huge amount of money, and you want to be certain that you've got the money, your supplier is reputable, what the warranties are going to be, where you're going to get spare parts. There's lots to consider there. So you would probably have some sort of documented process that people know, look, if it's over £1,000, you need authorization, or you must go down this route instead. But document-wise, as long as you can show us how you've selected that supplier, so if it's a long-standing relationship, okay, that's fine. If you work with somebody 20 years, they do get a little bit, got this again if they get a supplier form each time. But it's your system, so you can write into a policy that if you are supplying us from January 2018, you will be required to fill out a new suppliers form. We need to know a little bit about you, do a bit of due diligence. If you've supplied us previous to 2018, you won't be required to do that. And it's as simple as that. And you shouldn't really be badgered into finding out anymore. Obviously, given the different industries, depending on the level of control and what the nature of your business is, then yes, of course, we may ask to say, have you got a flow chart? How many people are using the process? How do we control it that way? But the reality is a lot of businesses just have 2 or 3 people maybe using this, and you don't need a big drawn out. Just measure the risk of your business is what I'm saying when you are considering that process. Production and service provision is basically your job card, or however you provide that instruction of work to whoever it's going to be carried out by. So what's the job? What do we want the completion of the job to be? How are we going to measure it in terms of resources? So it's basic management of allocation of work, isn't it? Is the person competent to do the job? Do we need to validate it or have any calibration? And then, of course, we need to consider the post-delivery activities as well. So it's basically like me giving a job card to a production line. They'll work to those instructions, or it might even be on a tablet nowadays, mightn't it? It might be on a live plasma screen if everybody is doing the same job, doing a high volume of things. But the key thing is, can you retrieve that information? Can we trace it back? So can I say, all right, okay, so I'm just about to make the tins of beans. This is my part of the job, and I can trace that all the way back to the customer order and maybe where we've bought the material from in order for me to produce that can. Property belonging to customers or external sources must have documentation. So it might be that you've got a long hire on a piece of equipment or a machine in where you're working, or it might be that your function is to repair items. So, you know, if you're fixing a car, you've got to look after the customer property, and generally people will provide paperwork for that, not just for the system, but because the customer might want it, or your insurer. So it just fits into what you're already doing. And again, control of changes must be documented. This is probably something quite natural that we would do and say, oh, right, I should possibly make a note that, you know, they no longer want this, or, you know, they now want 70 instead of 2 of these. And then that might kick the process to start again. But there we go. Release of products and services. So evidence of conformity with the acceptance criteria. So what we found in our review of customer requirements is what they want. Okay, we've then translated what they want into the job card, and now we're ready to say we've finished. We can send that off to the customer. So we're just effectively doing a quality check, aren't we? And we're evidencing that. We're going to maybe have a checklist. Some people record begin lists or record the, you know, an entire inspection depending on what the item is. But if we're saying that we're ready to release it and we've got a traceability to the person authorising that release, then you've already got one document, so to speak. You've got one person who is ready to say that that's now able to go. And that might happen in packing. It might happen on the completion of creating a good, or it might happen if it's a service that you are authorised to go out and sell, or if it's, you know, an online or a phone-based service, you might actually get that instruction to go as that's your product release, and your work instruction may tie into that release of products and services. What we do find, obviously, with operations is this is the area that's most productive, and it's possibly the area where we may find non-conformances most predominantly in. And the idea is, if we're following our own process, then we should be able to recognise if something doesn't quite conform. And all we're doing is reviewing again, aren't we? So unless it's something perfectly obvious, right, that's not right, that's not what the customer's going to want. We're just going to log it, we're going to note it down, and then we're going to describe what we've done about it, basically. And then the reason this is important is because this produces a data which is really useful in utilisation. Performance evaluation, so this kind of knocks back, doesn't it, onto recording the non-conformances. So it might help you in deciding what needs to be measured and monitored, methods for monitoring measurement, and when it shall be performed, and the results, and when it can be analysed and evaluated. So the key part about this is that by recording it, by writing it down, you have some accountability. For example, we know what's expected, we're setting that benchmark. It could be a method for using or creating KPIs. And might be a ridiculous example, but I've now started seeing people put things on social media, like in weightlifting or weight loss groups, and it's always, I'm just writing this down so I'm accountable. I know if I put this paper or put it out there to the hundreds of people in groups, then I'll start to do it. So psychologically, it's a good thing, as well as being a requirement of the standard. I think we would all expect that internal audit plans, the scope of what you're auditing, the results and corrective action would be documented anyway. It would not make any sense for them not to be. That your management review minutes are documented, and any non-conformity and corrective action, of course, we would expect that to be documented as well. So with all that information that we've just looked at, and I think what we can potentially say, depending on what industry, is you've got a big, lovely, weighty quality management manual, which is floating about and not really doing very much. And then we've just got standard work documents that we need to effectively work anyway. So how do we reduce the information, but also evidence to the auditor? So if we reduce the weight of the paper trail, we need to increase the intellectual trail and be able to evidence that we know what we're doing. So all starts with the process at the centre and the training. This would be my own point one. What we often see is that when people have an induction, they're given the health and safety documents, they might or might not be told we've got a 9001 system in place, and then it's all the mandatory HR stuff of knowing about holidays and pay and, well, the reason you're going to work, really, isn't it? Wouldn't it make more sense to expand that induction and actually show them? So if we go back to my fantastic company, that's a good introduction to the company to let them know this is what we do. You know, can you give me certificates? I need to take those. And, you know, have you been trained on this equipment before? And we run through. Well, the difficulty is you've then got new members of staff that are coming through who are going to learn on the job predominantly. Even if they've done the job before, they need to know how you want it done. The people who've been there a while get left behind. So it's often good to do this refresher. Everybody knows how to lift up a heavy box, yet most of us each year will have to do some form of manual handling training. Why? Because it focuses the mind and it just makes you think, oh yeah, actually I've slipped a little bit there. I do get a little bit lackadaisical and complacent. So it's always good to continue that training. You can then evidence this through discussion with your auditor. So as long as we can see that this is what we do, this is what we say we do, and this is what we do, we can now see somebody in real time doing it. And that's what an audit is, isn't it, really, isn't it? We say, can you show me this? And you produce information, and then we'll watch somebody go through the process. So they're actually demonstrating that they know processes in place, they know about the company, they know about the objectives, they know about the policy, because it's all just through that organic discussion. No paperwork required. So these four next points are really where your paperwork comes in, your documented information. What's the purpose? Well, it's showing issues, and it's showing points for learning. So you're then evidencing that you are utilising your system, the effectiveness of the system, and how the processes come together. By showing improvement and reflection, it reduces the chance of reoccurrence. So we move to the internal audit. It's an opportunity to assess the system and see what can be removed. And by saying removed, the amount of times I've gone into an audit and said to a manager or a director, you've got too much paperwork. Have you considered removing some? A sigh of relief just comes onto the face, because they don't want all this paperwork either. So the internal audit, if done effectively, and often they're not, but they meet the standard from what we see, it's a deep dive. Look at the processes. You might find the processes aren't talking to each other. You might find there's an inefficient use of technology. You might find that the process users are following your process. However, they're deeply unhappy about it because they've got a much better way of doing it. And that's an opportunity to communicate that during that audit. It then needs to be passed, doesn't it, to the management review, because that's an opportunity then for the management and the people in charge of the business to do a deep dive into those results, do a deep dive into the non-conformances, the actions and the effectiveness. And the solutions may come from what we've just discussed there and form KPIs and benchmarks, and communicating this back through training, back to the beginning, will help again. So we're still keeping the processes at the centre of it all. We're just working out how can we best utilise that, and providing employees with tons and tons of paper and things to read that they'll never read and don't want to read isn't often the most effective way. So how do we start the process off? Well, as everything, it starts with leadership. The key thing is to know, what do you want to know? For example, that probably sounds a really stupid comment, but when you consider if you've got a volume of staff and you were able to shave a few minutes off each thing that they were to do each day, how many man days would you create? And it doesn't mean get rid of staff. What it means is utilise them better, get them more lean, more efficient. And bogging people down with documented information, paperwork, isn't often the right way. Yeah, it might mean an investment in software. It might mean an investment in, you know, having a year of pain, even trying to sift out and make it as lean as possible. But maybe the return on that would make that worth it. So the key point to start is leadership, finding out what do you want to know, and then delegating to somebody to do that internal audit and find out that information. And be brutally honest with yourselves. There is no point whatsoever going into this if you're going to say there's no problems. Second stage, analyse the results, communicate those results, engage the process users, get them to feed back to you. What you often think is the right way of doing something is often not the best for the people who are actually doing it at all. From this information, set objectives and monitor them regularly. So there is absolutely no point having a quality objective of maintain ISO 9001 2015. No point whatsoever when we've got a project like this going on. It's perfectly acceptable to say, right, we've got 12 months. Month 1, we might consider getting rid of the quality manual, really interrogating the context and the best way that our staff will respond to this, whether it's a poster, whether we put it on a website, however you want to do it. Month 2, you might actually look at the organisation and the structure of the leadership and say, well, what do we all do? What could we do better? Do we need, is everybody's roles balanced? You know, these are big projects. Look at it that way. And these are great quality objectives. Hopefully we'll have an output that you can show your auditor and all will be well. So if you've got any questions post webinar, then do feel free to get in touch. And I think that is most definitely you know, food for thought. It's difficult, isn't it, until you know what you actually want. We have got some questions, which I am going to aim to go through now. So the first one was, could this method be applied to other standards such as 14001? So the difficulty with 14 and 45 is because they include a lot of legislation. There is a different set of requirements for documented information. So in terms of whether, if it's asking you for context and it's asking you for, you know, objectives, how you present that system is up to you. So I'd say definitely for the first part of the standard, you could of course do that, as long as you are meeting what the standard asks you for documented information. And a good idea, Gary, might be, if you've got a paper copy of the standard, get a highlighter and go through it and highlight where it says shall retain documented information. Then that gives you a base mark of what you need to be able to present, and then how you present it is up to the company, not the auditor. I've got another one. Do you recommend any software for small companies? That's a really good question. I'd need to know a little bit more about the company, I suppose, and how big or small you are. We do have some information security consultants. Might be worth speaking with them about it, because they, and I have to say, would be much more knowledgeable than I am about software. I can just about use this, but there will be some software. I suppose it depends on price, so I'd be happy to put you towards one of our consultants. Okay, this is an interesting one. So I like the idea of what I see. The issue is auditors are still looking for more documents as evidence, and in some cases instructions, not NQA. Okay, so basically you've got naughty auditors wanting to, oh, hang on, lost it. Beg your pardon. Want to look, in some cases, instructions. This happens when an auditor has a certain background and expects the same from those being audited. Point on 8.4 and 6 always appear to be a problem, looking for more detail. So that's a really great point. So if somebody's come from an automotive background, for example, I mean, 9001 is nothing compared to those standards, the amount of detail and documentation that you're expected to provide. And yes, you know, if you're doing that a lot and then you get a 9001, I suppose from an auditing point of view, the temptation is to want to help the company improve and ask for those documents. However, if you're not in that industry, then arguably it's not an improvement, it's an imposition. So now you've got these slides. My advice, if we can say advice to yourselves, is to refer to 8.4 and 8.6, get the standard out and refer to 8.4 and 8.6 and ask any auditor who is challenging you on that to point to you where in the standard they're getting these questions from, what is it they're expecting to see, because we can't tell you what we expect to see. We can just ask you, can you show us to prove, for want of a better word, you're meeting the standard. Excuse me, I'm not sure if that's helped or not, but that's, I suppose, what I would do in your situation. If you provide multiple products and services, do you need a process for each product and service provided? So this goes straight back to the beginning and what's in your scope. So you might create 7,000 products to do with I don't know, robotic arms, but your scope might be to do with the distribution only. So if it's in scope, yes, you need a process, and yes, you need to have that individual process if you want. So, okay, let's break that down. If your sales process is the same for every product, then you only need one sales process. If how you create that product and service is different each time, then yes, you would need a process to reflect that. How can we handle emails, documents exchanges, or any other communication channel? So I would imagine what this means is, how can you keep it all together and evidence it? It depends how you want to do it, really. If you're wanting to use something like Teams or Google or Zoom, then there are files. So it's exactly as you would do now. You're just transferring it into a different medium. If you want to get in touch and ask me a little bit more about that, and I'm not sure I've understood your question correctly, but that's what I've taken from it. Are the templates available for internal audits? Yes, loads on Google. Or, of course, you can speak with a consultant who'd be able to help you out. We're not allowed, unfortunately, because we can't consult. 8.3, design. We get challenged stating we do not design is not true, as we all design, even if it is a service. Okay. Right, so we have this a lot. It's an endless question. All companies design, in that they design their management system, and all companies develop their management, well, all companies should develop their management system. In the true sense, the standard, and I'll send you a blog that we've done on this actually, which explains it in my view very well. If you are creating, whether it's through a drawing or planning, something which is tangible, then you are designing. If you're coming up with that, if the company is coming up with it. If you're taking something that a customer has brought to you and you have to modify it, then you're developing it, is how we would take it. And if you're not doing any of those things, then you're probably not designing. I will send that blog to you and you can have a look. And then if you want to have a discussion, that's absolutely great. Feel free to get back in touch. Not understanding what documentation is required for Section 7 report, support rather. Okay, so basically for Section 7, you need to determine what you're going to monitor and measure through the business. You need to be able to show competence of the people who are going to be performing the tasks, and you also need to determine yourselves what you actually want documented and what not. If you want to get in touch at any point to discuss any of these points raised, or if due to time I've not really answered the questions very effectively, then please do. You can get in touch through marketing. They will happily pass on the emails to me. You will be getting a copy of these slides and a recording as well. But for now, I will say thank you very much for your time, and we will speak again soon. Thank you.